Hi everyone, my name is Stijn Van Coillie. I'm a teacher at Digital Art and Entertainment, and for this video I will go over the topic how to make a game in Unity. For this video I will focus on the prototyping stage of making a game. I already did some brainstorming for a new concept and came up with a cool mechanic where when the player dies his previous actions are saved and both the player and his previous actions get respawned. To know if this concept is fun, I need to prototype some mechanics, and that's one of the purposes of a prototyping session. So let's write a quick list of the elements that we'll need for this concept. First, we'll be needing a character controller, a camera that follows our character, something to record our character movement, something that playbacks our movement, a simple enemy, and of course gun and bullets to shoot the enemy. Let's start with the basics. For this I will not making a very advanced character, just a simple character to test our concept should be efficient. For the player movement component, I made some variables that can be accessed in the editor. In this case, I want the character to move 10 units per second and rotate at 270 degrees per second. Once in the update, I'll move and rotate the character according to the input. Next thing would be to implement our camera behavior. So in here the camera will follow the target's position and rotation with some inertia. For now we have our basic elements. Next thing is to implement our recording of the movement. Of course, we don't want to record every frame, especially not if we are playing at more than 200 frames per second. So let's say we're gonna record 60 frames in 1 second. In this case, if our time is bigger or equal to our time frame, we are gonna store some information. we should store the position and rotation of our character and when our character is shooting. So we need some variable to store this information. In this case, I'll make a class for it. A struct would have been fine too, in this case. So a quick recap, I implemented a start recording function that will reset our functionality of recording things, and that also will start the recording. And here we are storing the information every time frame. And of course we have a function to stop the recording, which is simply disabling the component. Now we need something to play back this information. In the playback, I made sure it's the same time frame as the recording. So in here, I check if the play info still has data. For this, I went back to my recording script and added index variable and an isPlaying method. If my player info is still playing, I set the position and rotation from the player info to the dummy. We don't have the dummy for now, so that's the next thing I will make. So this is our basic dummy prefab. Next thing now would be to make this dummy play back the movement whenever our main character respawns. To create this respawn functionality, I created a component game control that will be responsible for respawning, but also had to have some kind of control over all the active characters, active enemies, the dummies, the bullets, and so on and so on. But for now, for now, the game control will only do one respawn of the character and one dummy. For now, I call the respawn function if we press the right mouse button, simply because we don't have a game over or enemies that can kill our character yet. So this is just for testing purposes. So in the respawn, I should stop the recording, reset my character. I should instantiate a dummy that has the recording of my player character, and then that dummy should replay every movement from the previous character. Playback function seems to work for now. We could improve the playback function, for example, lure between the different position and rotations, so we would be more smooth or fluent. But for prototype stage, I really don't care that much about it. Next thing would be to adjust the code so it can replay multiple characters. So I made a list to store all previous records and also made a list to keep track of all the dummies that are in the scene. And then in the respawn, I destroy all active dummies. I reset the player character. I add my current recording of the character to my list. And according to that list, I'll make new dummies. So far so good, everything seems to move correctly. Of course I don't like my camera movement, it moves towards my player's position, but it should actually snap to the position once I respawn. So I think that's next. This is just a simple reset function that snaps the transform to the target's position and rotation. Much better. Okay, moving on to the next thing. I should add enemies, but I actually would like to add first a gun to the character. I think would be cool. to shoot some bullets and all. I made some very simple representation of a gun. I do make sure that the gun is pointing in a forward direction because I will be needing that for instantiating my bullets. I also added a transform at the end of the gun's slide. This will be used to instantiate bullets on that position and actually look at that direction. On top of that, I made a simple shoot animation for a little bit of player feedback. In this case, if the shoot parameter gets triggered, it will play the shoot animation. Here I added the gun as a nested prefab inside the character. Next thing would be to add the shoot mechanic. I made a gun component for this that just simply shoots a bullet once the time frame is bigger than some kind of fire rate. So there will be like a fire rate for this gun. And we can call this gun then from the player movement or from any other script that we like. For example, if we'll need this component for the enemy, we can just use the same prefab. And here I'm just simply checking if I should fire a bullet or not. This is according to the old input system of Unity. So in the input manager, you could actually change those keys inputs. You can change to controller and all that, or different keys, even alternative keys. Alright, so our character is shooting. That's a good thing, but our dummy isn't shooting. He doesn't even have a gun, so we should first handle that. So for our dummy to shoot, we should actually store that information for when should the dummy shoot a bullet or not. We are not doing that anywhere, so we should adjust the player info, add an extra list, just a boolean with true or false. Should the dummy shoot a bullet or not? This seems to work. Our dummy is shooting as far as I can tell. Yeah. So let's add the bullets. So our bullets should only exist for like 2 seconds or whatever. We can make a variable for it actually. But in the update function, the bullet should move according to some unit. In this case was 20 units per second and should move in a local space. So once we are instantiating the bullet, we make sure it's already looking at the right direction. And in the gun, we're just instantiating the bullet at the right position and the right angle. Finally, we're gonna add the enemies so we can shoot at things. For the visuals of enemy, I just duplicated the character and made a different material for it. So I didn't bother that much with the visuals for it. It served the purpose, especially for this case. For the enemy, I'll just implement some basic functionalities, like if the character is in the field of view of the enemy, then he will shoot at you. I will not do some kind of movement with the enemy, sorry. So it will be stationary the whole time. I always find it useful to visualize these things inside the editor. It just makes it easier to work with. So in this case, I'm just visualizing the field of view of the enemy with a reddish color. Now I would like to add the shoot mechanic. Of course, for this I need a target. In this case, I want the enemy to have a collection of all the players, the transform in this case, and then I want to look for a valid target. If there's a valid target already, then check if the target is still valid. If not, look for another target. If there's none, then don't shoot. If there's a target, just shoot at that direction. So if there's a target, we will looking at that target, at that player, and call the shoot mechanic, shoot method from the gun component. I'm pretty sure I can do this or should do this in a more elegant way, but because this is prototyping, I don't really care that much about even clean coding. Because the prototyping stage will actually purpose from what do I want to implement. Is my concept fun, of course, and it can make me brainstorm and think about what kind of design pattern I will use for the pre-production stage. But for the prototyping stage, I really don't care actually, which is something a lot of people will maybe argument with, but hey. Here I'm simply checking the enemy prefab inside the scene, checking if everything is still working accordingly. I'm also checking the gun. As you can see here, the fire rate is 0.35. That means even though I'm calling the shoot mechanic, the shoot function every frame, still it will only shoot a bullet every time frame. So that's good. Now, of course, our players will always be empty, so we should make some kind of functionality to collect all the players that are currently active within our scene. In the enemy control, I will simply have a collection of all the enemies that are currently available in the scene. I can optimize this later on if I like. But it's important that I go over all those enemies and assign them the current players that are active within our scene. So first of all, I'll make a function that search for all the players, then assign those players to the enemies that are in my underscore enemies. Of course, now I'm working with tags. Normally, I'm not a big fan of tags, but for this, I just go with it because it's just for testing purposes. And now I'm simply gonna test if my enemy is working. Yes, it is working. And this was actually already a little bit of fun to just respawn and attack the player and the enemy, even though it doesn't do anything yet. It will be. Now I can't forget to reset, of course, all the enemies because they have to be at the same rotation as they were starting at. I should do this in the game control from the moment we are respawning. That means we have to store the start rotation of each enemy. Here I simply forgot to assign the enemy control to the game control. No biggie. Next step would be to have some kind of impact, some collision when firing a bullet. So if I fire as a character my bullet to an enemy, that the enemy really get destroyed and the bullet itself too. So for this I'm working with different kind of layers. Okay, a layer for the character, the enemy, and for each of them their bullet type. I'm making a bullet variant for the enemy and assigning the correct layers to the prefabs. And in here I'm simply setting the correct layer collision matrix. In this case we only want the bullets of the character hitting the enemy and the bullets of the enemy hitting the characters. So from the moment the bullet hits the enemy, I will of course disable this script so the enemy is not still shooting and targeting the player. I will also destroy the bullet because it doesn't need anymore, it's hit his target. And we should also disable actually the game object so it's not visible anymore in the scene. Now we implement the same functionality as in with the enemy, with the exception of course, instead of destroying or disabling our character, we're just gonna respawn our character. So during playtesting, I noticed that my character didn't respawn once it got hit by a bullet from the enemy. So I started to look for where the issue was lying, and I didn't find it, not immediately. So I did some small debugging, checking if every layer was correctly or if the collider was present. In the end, it was just the layer mask that was set up incorrectly. So here I found what the issue was. It was the layer matrix. And then the next thing I noticed was that the dummies didn't die. So I also have to implement that. So on trigger enter, I destroy the bullet and disable the game object of the dummy. Here I had the issue that the dummy was disabled, but the target was still valid. So we had to fix that issue. I did this by just simply destroying the dummy's game object, so the target wasn't valid anymore. And now we can add more enemies, we can rotate them differently, and so on and so on. And we can test this if this is still working or not. So during testing, I saw that my dummy was still visible in the scene, even though he was stopped playing the sequence. So I simply had to implement that. So I went to my playback, and if the player info is not playing anymore, then just simply destroy the dummy. Next thing we could do is maybe add some game feel, maybe some more player feedback, like a camera shake, haptic feedback, sound effects, particle effects, and so on and so on. But hey, for this prototype stage, I'm actually quite happy. Next thing would be then test some level design, maybe some different AIs, and so on and so on. Just to test This is the end of the video. I want to thank you all for watching, and if you would like a link to this project, I would be happy to share with you. Just leave a comment or something. Bye everyone.